Hi, this is Paul. Over the weekend, I finally had a chance to listen to the Bari Weiss, Jordan Peterson conversation, and I thought it was, again, this could be a high point in the second wave. I think the Jordan Peterson second wave could be very different from the first wave. And this conversation touched on, I think, what's at the heart of both of them. And it's a beating religious heart. In many ways, and I've wrestled a lot with how to address this video because there's so much in it. But in order to address something like this, you really have to sort of begin at the core, at the peak of the hierarchy, at the religious statements by both of them. And after that, begin to take apart the subsidiary pieces. Because what lies beneath this is, I think, as now postmodernity continues to come into focus, as modernity continues to recede, as the drowsiness of secularism, which is in some ways sort of a diluted version, diluted, not deluded, diluted, a diluted version of Christianity is also receding with modernity. What we see in Jordan Peterson and Bari Weiss are two deeply religious people. Now, what do I mean by religious? Again, I've talked before about religion as worldview and religion as it is often viewed through the secular lens, through the secular frame. You can hear this from the new atheists. Religion has something to do with supernatural beings or God construed as a super thing in a metadivine realm. And what Jordan and Bari wrestle with here is the decline of that civilization, and they both want to fight for it. But in many ways, and Bari Weiss, I think partly because of her lifestyle choices, embodies some of the contradictions of this moment. There's no going back. And there's almost a sense with some people like, no, we've reached it right now. Let's not go any further. And of course, many who are more progressive say, no, we need to go further and further and further. But there's not a tremendous amount of clarity about where that further leads to. And we've talked a lot on this channel about telos, ends, goals, some of this. So both Jordan and Bari are in many ways on the same side, voicing some of the same ideas. But well, let's jump in, because Jordan tells about a dream here, which I think in many ways just really encapsulates a lot of this. So I'm going to begin it at the end of this video, and as sometimes happens, I'll talk about the end and it'll be, okay, I'm done with it, and then I won't treat it. But the section about institutional racism is dealing with, and that's a long section of this video, and it's woven within her story. This entire video is seeking Jordan asking her, why did you leave the New York Times? And then just at the end, what are you doing now with Substack? It's the whole video. But of course, they go in Jordan Peterson fashion all through other various places. And I think this conversation is a good one in order to, I think, for some who have sort of been in the fog of secularity instead of sort of the bright air of the Christianity that in which secularity makes its fog. I think about the prologue to the Gospel of John. You have, as in the prologue to the Gospel, as you have in the Gospel of John, as you have in 1 John especially, the Johannine parts of the New Testament are some of the most black and white, good and bad, Antichrist, Christ versus Antichrist, on and off, binary, antithesis-laden elements of the New Testament. Secularism is sort of a fog. It's not darkness, but there's sort of a bright fog that permits a lot of what we have benefited from and suffered from in our culture. And now the fog is burning off, and so things are getting black and white, binary, good and bad, polarized again. But neither of these individuals want that. Jordan has continued to show a reticence to embracing Christianity as such. And fair enough, I'm a Protestant, and in some ways the fog of secularism is a product of this enormous conflict that was the Protestant Reformation, and we're still sorting it out. But Bari Weiss, of course, early in the conversation, she says, I've studied extensively the history of the Jews. She's Jewish. She's also a married lesbian. And she says she's basically derived her, she's derived her navigational ability from that history. Now, again, in secular parlance, you can talk about morality and history sort of out there, but obviously what she's studied is a deeply religious subject, and her gyroscope has been calibrated by that religious history all the way up until the present. So all of those ideas are really at play in this conversation, and it could bear scrutiny to sort of tease them out and work them forward. But I wanted to put that on the map before we would go through elements of this conversation, because if you see that, the other elements of the conversation make more sense. Okay? And there's some issues, especially with the systemic racism section, where I want to talk about three concepts that I've been working with. I've been talking about data and narrative, but I want to talk about icons as well in terms of that, the relationship of that. And I think those three ideas are a good way into this question of systemic racism. How should we as a society deal with it? What's going on with our language and political games with respect to these things? Again, the conversation was outstanding. But the haunting question of secularity, which is being asked again and again, which is, can you actually have a society without a religious underpinning? And a lot of people are a little foggy on, and maybe we all are, the fog of secularity. What do we mean by religious there? Because, what comes through with Jordan and Bari Weiss and Sam Harris and just about everyone else in Western society is a good bit of the inherited assumed morality of Jesus. And that is played out in this realm. And again, Tom Holland's Dominion, that's simply assumed, and it's unrecognized. And if it's assumed and unrecognized, it sort of has an existence in the cloud, as it were. It's around us. We pick it up from each other. We like it. We want to maintain it. But we don't exactly know how. Because secularity is sort of, in some ways, a bright fog. It's not darkness. It's not light. It's a bright fog. So let's jump in here at the end, and then I'll go to the end, and then I'll see what I do.
Tell me the end of the story. So now you're on Substack.
Oh God, there's so much that's happened. we've drawn out like a resignation over 2 hours, but I hope we fit other things that are of interest into it. So now I'm on Substack, like I think a lot of heterodox journalists who don't fit in with a tribe are also on Substack, and I think it's
Now, that comment there, that don't fit in with a tribe. Everybody needs a tribe. We often talk about tribalism in negative terms. There's a positive aspect to tribalism in positive terms, and because everybody needs a tribe, because you can't do it alone. And she's going to talk about how that functions in terms of journalism. One of the interesting pieces, which, again, I want to go back through at one of the things that haunts this talk is the fall of what these two see as the golden age, the twilight of the golden age. And because she's going to give an impassioned, I think a very correct appeal for institutions. And there's a segment a little bit earlier where she says some things, and one of you sent me an email and said she's talking estuary, and she is. But there has to be an instantiation, and it can't be simply individuals. And in my last videos where I talked about Peterson and the ones with David Fuller and Jonathan Rowson, Peterson and individuals, the weakness of his individualism comes into play here. And so here you have Bari Weiss. Basically, Substack has sort of become a refugee for people who no longer fit into the institutions that they used to call home, but have been purified out of them. Okay, there have been heresy trials and struggle sessions, and these people have been squeezed out. And so she very much wants to see new institutions. But for now, it's Substack because one must eat.
Extremely interesting. The journalists who interest into it. So now I'm on Substack, like I think a lot of heterodox journalists who don't fit in with a tribe are also on Substack. And I think it's extremely interesting. The thing that I think is a challenge.
It's like an IDW of journalists.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is challenging, right, is...
It's good to see Peterson's sense of humor back.
If you're like a dentist or an accountant or a lawyer, and I meet a lot of these people, and they say, I don't trust the New York Times anymore, what do I read? Well, it's a really dissatisfying answer, because I'm like, well, you need to subscribe to these 10 Substacks and listen to these 5 podcasts and follow these 30 people on Twitter. No, like, that's not going to work.
Okay, right there. Human beings, tribes, institutions. We need them. I was just thinking about, of course, the Southern Baptist Convention is going on now, and with all the press that's digging up. Institutions are funny things. And what we tend to do is we create looser institutions when they feel them too constrained, but there's always this... one of the things that I thought about this is, of course, John Vervaeke's opponent processing. There's always these dynamics of opponent processing. There's not too much, not too little, trying to find the right mix. And so now with at least her conceptualization of the goodness of the New York Times being blown apart by the events that she describes throughout this video, she's looking for a new creation. She's looking for something around which a community can coalesce. Now, one of the videos that I haven't yet treated, but was an outstanding video, was Jonathan Peugeot and Rafe Kelly. It's on Rafe Kelly's channel. Because I thought Rafe Kelly is a terrific conversation partner. Those of you who follow my channel carefully know that. Because Rafe has sort of embodies, so Rafe's father, what's his name? Sunbeam? So that gives you a sense of Rafe grew up in sort of a hippie commune. Not fundamentalist Christianity somewhere like some of you, or not Roman Catholic, and not purely secular, but sort of a hippie commune. And then, took the deep dive into Sam Harris and New Atheism, and then was sort of, shaken out of that by Jordan Peterson. And so now he's very much in the thick of Vanderklay and Peugeot and Vervaeke and what we're trying to figure out here. But Pashot very clearly, part of what's good about that conversation is Rafe is good at getting down to some essentials and really helps Jonathan, I think, speak very well. In order for a community to coalesce, there needs to be something above it that is sufficiently clear so that the people around it can coalesce and sort of Voltron up. All right? And so now we're going to be looking for another Vervaekian term, relevance realization. Okay, what exactly is the thing at the heart of this lost world that Bari Weiss and Jordan Peterson are lamenting? Now, again, both Bari Weiss and Jordan Peterson have in their getting kicked out of and in their pushing back against the previous regime, the previous liberal regime, have garnered a whole bunch of conservatives in their wake, and conservatives who are appreciative because the enemy is your friend. But neither Bari Weiss nor Jordan Peterson are in many ways conservative, but they're conservative now because what they want to do is to preserve this liberal establishment. But that question about liberalism has been going on for a long time. And so you've got elements all along the way. No, we should preserve it here. We should preserve it here. We should preserve it here. And so, of course, gay married Bari Weiss wants to preserve it after Oberfeld, the Supreme Court decision. She talks a little bit about that. So you've got all of these trailing conservatives along the way, and there are temperamental reasons for that. There are personality reasons for that. And, of course, you've got the Jordan many times in the video, sort of scopes out her personality type and says, well, you're low in politeness and high in you're low in agreeableness, you're low in politeness, but you're high in conscientiousness and you're high in compassion. And so that sort of makes up who you are. And, she'll probably, if she takes Jordan's personality test, we'll see. But they're sort of working on this. And of course, in time, politically, socioculturally, as certain clumps of conservatives gain momentum, it'll put brakes on the people who are at the progressive end of things pushing in a certain way. And that's part of what we're seeing. We're seeing critical mass develop. But now what's coming from her is going to be an impassioned zealot's plea, which is fascinating because, again, you can only really coalesce the group if you don't have something to circle around, Jonathan Haidt, if you don't have something to coalesce around, if you don't have something to look up above it and draw you in, you will continue to be a reactive community, and you will continue to be, in that sense, all of the dynamics will be parasitic. The only identity you will have will be anti-woke. And woke is, of course, the identity of anti-capitalist or anti-past order or anti-structural or something like that, okay? So you don't want to have a reactive identity. So you're going to need to articulate that thing that you circle around. Now, it's important to note that she is not a priest. She's a journalist. And journalists have a particular part to play, but in many ways, towards the end of this, you hear her with a missionary cry.
So I am extremely interested in what I've been referring to. Like, how do I make a common address for that sensibility?
Okay. She's looking for the thing around which her community can coalesce, because they're going to need to institutionalize. They're going to need to instantiate in a corporation, in a church. Again, back to, maybe I should just play it. I've got it on my clips channel. which I almost turned everything in this video into a clip. I still am a little torn on what to do with my clips channel, because if I just take clips, YouTube doesn't like that just clip taking anymore. But then I'm making little videos, and of course, once I start talking, little videos become big videos. So I'm still figuring out what to do with my clips channel. Anyway, so I played this recently, but it bears hearing again, because we might imagine Alistair McGrath sort of sitting back like you did to Brett Weinstein and say, it's almost as if you want to start a new religion.
I wanted to start maybe with Tara's point about sort of the durability of this kind of, I'll conflate your 2 points and say the durability of imminent individualist religion in American life, right? And the fact.
And now this isn't imminentist individual religion. This was a religion that the New York Times used to be a platform to maintain. And I've talked quite a bit in my videos about platforms and about how, in many ways, the church platform has been deeply disrupted. And that disruption has been going on since the time of the Protestant Reformation. In many ways, the Protestant Reformation was a deep disruption of the church platform. But yet this church behavior, this congregationalizing and institutionalizing. I mean, this, of course, is deep within the Protestant ethos, because Protestants then formed churches.
Fact that you have plenty of, divination and God within spirituality going back to the 18th century. It seems to me that if you look at sort of the historical pattern in American life, you have sort of either surges of that kind of spirituality or particular religious geniuses who manifest it. And then the movements and institutions that they build have historically then been sort of pulled back towards a kind of normative Christian structure or framework, to use Steve's account, right? So,
Now, think again, I brought up Billy Graham for the last 3 years talking about Jordan Peterson. Billy Graham didn't found a church. Billy Graham surfed on the waves of churches. Christianity Today became, in a sense, the New York Times of evangelicalism. He had a practice of crusades, and in some ways he used churches and churches used him. It was a symbiotic relationship when he came to town. And of course, there are many aspects within Christianity that afforded such a thing. But Billy Graham didn't found a church. We don't have the first church of Billy Graham or Billy Grahamism or Grahamism or any of those things. And that, I think, shows a fundamental shift in platforms.
To take the examples of the 2 biggest 19th century examples maybe are Christian Science, which comes out of New Thought in certain ways, and Mormonism, which gets its start in the sort of the kind of divination happy world of upstate New York in the early 19th century. And both of those, if you look at them from a sort of how Christian are they perspective at the outset, you can make a case that they're both pretty stark departures, maybe not getting all the way to something we call paganism or post-Christianity, but clearly really stark departures. In Mormonism's case, you mentioned polyamory, right, as a feature of the contemporary political landscape. Early Mormonism goes all the way to polygamy. And then, over the course of the next 100 years, you get to a point where by the time of the 1950s and 1960s, both Christian Science and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, while they're still regarded as heretical or dangerous or cultic by some other Christian denominations, are, I think, reasonably seen as connected to a kind of, a kind of Christian tradition in.
So Christianity has within it this certain auto-correcting feature. And again, this is where, Jordan Peterson talking about ideology versus religion is helpful, because these ancient religions have deep resources that we are not aware of. That sort of, Douthat's point is that they're sort of pulled, Christian Science, Seventh-day Adventists, 50 years ago were much more of a sect. Increasingly, Seventh-day Adventists are just sort of another evangelical church that meets on a funny day of the week. Okay, Mormons, conversations with Christian leaders, Christian Reformed philosopher Richard Mouw, Jehovah's Witnesses. There's this, sometimes Jehovah's Witnesses would come to my door, and if I had a little time and I was feeling a little trollish, would sort of just sit down and act like a normal guy and then start asking a few peculiar questions about their personal ideas around issues such as the Trinity. Now, I wouldn't say the word Trinity because I would be exposed for what I was doing, but I asked some more questions about, the resurrection and Jesus and the life of the age to come and 144,000, and because I knew these things, and in some ways I was a little better prepared than the foot troops that they deployed to the door. And I did this in my own way, not to try to flip them or expose them or belittle them, but I want to know how much the foot soldier of the Jehovah's Witness is actually up on the finer distinctions of their religious system. But then again, there's plenty of sloppiness. I mean, I've spoken before about the Gnosticism in American evangelicalism. I think dispensationalism has taken many churches in a poor direction. So, but again, back to the institutions. Of course, Jordan Green, is it Greenhall or Green or Hall? Jordan Hall, talks about Blue Church. And in many ways, New York Times is the platform of the Blue Church. And at one point, Bari Weiss talks about the fact that there's this purifying element to it. And she decries the fact that the New York Times, in many ways, sort of analogous to Fox News or Donald Trump or, AOC. What's happening is that everyone has to appeal to their base. And the easiest way to appeal to your base is to use fear, to antagonize, to draw bright lines, to polarize. And so part of what Bari Weiss is lamenting is really the lost, consistent haze of bright secularity
in American life. And there's clearly an aspiration, at least among parts of the leadership of those what become those churches, to move in that direction. And it seems to me one thing that's been different since the 60s and 70s, right, is that hasn't happened to the same degree, right? So we've gone through the sort of Marianne Williamson presidential campaign, which unfortunately has not won enough support to merit the fascination that I've applied to it. But I feel like a 19th century version of Marianne Williamson would have started a church, right?
19th century version of Marianne Williamson would have started a church. What does Bari Weiss want to start? Blue Church 1.0 instead of present New York Times being Blue Church 2.0? So she's not tinkering with platform, but this is sort of what we're after here.
That independent-minded spirit that, is not like...
Independent-minded spirit. Is there really any such thing? Alan Jacobs wrote a book about thinking. And we always admonish people to think for themselves. That's sort of the proselytizer's cry. Because what I'd really like for you to do is to think like me. But now she pushes back, and rightly so. There's a great segment in this where both she and Peterson agree that in many ways what the individual with authority, and now there's another Rebel Wisdom video that I watched that I want to bring in in some ways when I treat that segment of their video. And that's why I thought about just sitting down and muscling my way through this entire video to do a commentary on the whole thing. But there's so many other pieces I want to bring in because this video touches on so many of the issues that are currently at play. Do we ever really think for ourselves? But now the good mentor, let's say, and I thought Weiss and Peterson were dead on right in this. The good mentor encourages even the heterodox thoughts of the mentee, because the good mentor understands that this is a part of the developmental process. And I've talked quite a bit in my videos about how deconstruction isn't always a bad thing. There's differentiation in terms of childhood development, and it's a necessary stage of, if you want to find true zealots, look at fifth and sixth graders. They're usually just true zealots. And as Joey from the Discord server and from the local meetup notes, that in some ways it's sort of this, so many of the present revolutionaries in the social sphere are actually deeply conservative because all they're doing is mimicking boomer rebellion. And it's like, is that conservative? If Steve Jobs stands on stage and says, accept no dogma, and then you say, I accept no dogma, to what degree are you just bought into the dogmatism of Steve Jobs? And we're sort of in those inversions right now. And of course, Peugeot talks about those in good ways, that we're in these strange loops right now. And Akira the Don had this great line of how much more naked can Madonna get? At some point, the hot girl is the one who has clothes on. And the real revolutionary, the real radical figures out how to stay married and faithful to their spouse and not get divorced and live out till death do us part. That's the real radical. You say, well, wait a minute, that's a traditionalist. Well, it's that circular inversion we have going here. So Bari Weiss she's looking for the essence around which she can coalesce the sacred community. That's what she's looking for. And, my conversation with Cale Zeldin and Brett Sockold, where they were talking about how, when John Paul II became Pope and then Benedict after, a whole bunch of them thought, in some ways, this is the end of history. Our church will always stay with our present regime in it. And the same letter that I read on one of my previous videos, Aaron Sorkin in Vanity Fair writing a letter to his daughter. I'm sorry Trump was elected. I promise this will never happen again. Because it's just going to be just continual progress out into the eschaton. It's the end of history, except for this bump that was Trump and Brexit. Really? Read much history? And so in some ways, Bari Weiss and Jordan Peterson want to, hey, let's take a step back and freeze it right here. Is that really what Bari Weiss wants to do? Is that really what Jordan wants to do? But they're saying, no, we've taken a turn and we've gone, so we've got to go back to the fork. And, we always have that desire. Orthodox, it's before you started doing Christianity in Latin that messed everything up in Augustine. Or it's before, Martin Luther and Zwingli and Jan Hus. If all of those had never been, then, the Middle Ages would have continued. And it's like, well, I'm certainly not saying progress, everything that comes next is progress. By no means. There's corruption and decay. There's always those things too. But how can we know the good? And so in some ways, Jordan Peterson and Bari Weiss are saying, we've known the good and we're losing it. And fair enough. And, as part of what Jonathan Rowson said to David Fuller, part of the beauty of Peterson's message has been, hey, look, the really good things that we enjoy now are fragile, and we're we're going down a dangerous path. It's that way that Jordan Peterson and Rod Dreher have a lot in common. And Bari Weiss here is sounding the alarm. She's becoming a religious zealot here. But you then have to say, well, what exactly is the religion? Could you be a little more clear on that? Because secularity is sort of an intentional fog. It's a bright fog, and it's a useful fog, but it really is sort of a fog. And maybe human beings sort of need fog because because our ways are dark, says the prologue to the Gospel of John.
Like centrist in the sense of like just finding the middle path, but is able to see truth but is able to separate, let's say, identity from ideas.
Okay, so there's clearly that idea right there. Okay, identity from ideas. But, you don't have to poke too much at either of those because identity has ideas deep inside of them already. And so that's good. And again, no, we're not going to get, my demands aren't going to be for absolute purity or clarity here because I can't do it either. Now, obviously, as a confessing Christian, I have perhaps some more foundations I can point to. But, and again, as maybe right now, that's a good thing. We're always sort of dead reckoning, rough drafting, trying to find our way forward. And it's that to be human. But is that going to be enough?
And is interest in the sense of like just finding the middle path, but is able to see truth but is able.
See, she don't want to go there. She understands the problems. And, hey, I'm not trying to be a troll here or anything like that. It's really hard. I mean, I've got hundreds of hours of video of me doing this stuff because it's really hard. But let's understand exactly what's happening here in this video. Because they're wrestling with the religious question. They really are.
Able to separate, let's say, identity from ideas. And is able to say, yeah, that person maybe sucks on this thing, but they're really right about that.
So what is it down in there where we recognize the right and the wrong? And again, both of them know, and they're exactly right. The reason you can't just have, the answer is Bari Weiss Substack, or Bari Weiss is a prophet, or the Church of Bari Weiss, just like the Church of Williamson. No, we're not going to do that. And she herself is saying, no, I need a community around me because, and as just, we need to be able to test. We need to find each other. We need to be able to test these ideas. And Peterson is right in that, in talking at them out loud and processing that. And all of these are the necessary things we must do. Absolutely. And again, I've studied, what she says, I've studied Jewish history. Okay. That's sort of looking at the beam. C.S. Lewis's Meditations from a tool shed. She's looking through a beam, but it's a little foggy.
That's what I'm interested in building. And so the way that started off for me, and I'm proud of it, is, commissioning op-eds and columns and reported pieces from voices that, don't have the platform that I think that they should.
Okay, but that I think that they should. I mean, there's that little thing inside that we don't know what to call. Of course, religious people are always paying attention to that little thing. But now if you're sort of in the bright fog of secularism, well, it's my little internal compass. It's my little gyroscope. It's my muse. What is it?
And trying to elevate them to my readers. But it's going to be, my podcast network. And ultimately, I hope like a whole ecosystem of journalism and storytelling. That's what I'm interested in building. And so
storytelling. Why? Well, again, narrative and storytelling is sort of the foundation of, certainly the foundation of the Judeo-Christian worldview.
I have tens of thousands of subscribers, and that's been fantastic, and I'm incredibly grateful to it. But for me, this is just the beginning. And I
Ambition.
Really, really, like in the end of the day, the reason that I left the New York Times, Jordan, is that, yes, because I was being bullied. Yes, because I couldn't do my job. Both true things. But ultimately, it's because I really believe that the fight for
Here it comes.
liberalism, and I don't mean that in the partisan sense, but
What words can I use to explain the desire of my heart, the center of my life, the thing I'm going to live for, the hill I'm willing to die on?
I mean the kind of values we've been describing during this conversation, that like that is more important than any amount of popularity, than any amount of accolades on Twitter, than anything else.
Bingo! Now we've got a religion. Well, not really. We don't really have a religion. We have a missionary. We have a heart that's beating, a vision for something, and she's willing to die on that hill. And we have a zealot. Are we going to put up a church? How are we going to go about this? No, we're going to have podcasts, and we're going to have print, and we're going to have text online, and we're going to have, aren't we just all sort of building a new church? But not a church, because is it a church? Isn't it a church? What are we doing? It's deeply religious.
Than anything else. And so I had to leave the institution in order to fight for liberalism. And that I see as like the mission of my life, I guess you could say.
And the
There you go.
catastrophe of our times.
Yeah, but
I mean, especially for someone who's older like me, I had a dream a while back. I wandered into the backyard of a cabin that I was staying at, and there was a dying lion by a fire pit at the boundary of this cabin's property. And my aunt, who's
an actual dying lion?
Literal internet. Oh, modernity. Oh, modernity. We must do this to stories, shouldn't we?
This is in a dream.
Oh, in a dream.
Yes,
okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, okay. We're not doing religion, Howard. You're just storytelling.
so my aunt called to me to warn me about the presence of this lion. And I looked at it, and it was in rough shape. It was mangy and ill-kempt and not good, but still, a lion and powerful. And then I wandered around to the left side of the house, and interestingly enough, and there was a whole number of them, tigers, lions, all these predatory beasts, all in terrible shape and all hungry and willing to attack. And I had to speak in order to keep them at bay. And I woke up and I thought, well, Jesus, that's pretty bloody obvious. I know what that dream means.
Yeah.
There's all these dying lions. The New York Times.
You don't need to be a psychologist to interpret that dream. That dream interprets itself. Well, also because he spoke it here in this context.
The legacy medias, the institutions. I'm not happy to see their demise.
No.
It's really awful. They were stellar. And to hear someone like Yeonmi Park talk about Columbia in that way, it's so awful. And to see what happened with you at the New York Times.
It's the end of an age. Now, anybody who reads Mary's song in the Gospel of Luke, this is the way of the world. This is the age of decay. All these things fall. And so then you look for the thing that endures even after the Babylonians destroy the temple. And the next temple doesn't measure up. And then the Romans destroy that one. And the church is always sort of on the precipice, but it's the thing that you can't kill. Well, isn't that the definition of a god?
It's like, on one hand, the story is, well, you pursued your creative spirit and you established yourself independently. And isn't that wonderful? But that loss that you described of the institution that has the capacity to apprentice and train, that's cataclysmic.
I will say that I spent months, I could kind of cry thinking about it, mourning that. Like, it is catastrophic. But There are things in history that have been more catastrophic. And that's the kind of perspective that I'm trying to keep, because
That's a good perspective.
if I spent all day looking at the wreckage, and more than just looking at the wreckage, trying desperately to try and like shore up something that is so clearly rotten, I would spend my life in grief. And I just believe so strongly that, not believe, I see.
Oh, we're really using religious words now.
That people believe so strongly that, not believe, I see that people have had to build things in way, way, way more trying and difficult circumstances than this. And so if they could build things from true wreckage, believe me, we can rebuild new institutions. We can. And that's what I'm going to do. And I think that.
Is she still a journalist? Is the truth, I mean, that's when we get into the conversation, the whole thing. But, you know, again, part of the problem about doing a video here at the end of it is it's kind of like, all right, I treated that video, on to the next one. Because there's so many good videos to talk about. There's Glenn Lowry talking to Cornel West, the secretary, the bulletin secretary of my church, is a member of two churches. And so she's also a member of the church of Cornel West's mother. And she just passed away. And so I get all that. Cornel West from Sacramento, so I've got all those ties in there. And Glenn Lowry talking about his faith, and Jonathan Peugeot and Rafe Kelly, and I mean, on and on and on. There's so many good things, but this is religion. I mean, going to start a church? No. Going to start a platform? Yeah. Why? Well, do these platforms... Well, what exactly will be at the center of this new platform that you want to create?
That's what everyone that comes to me, you know, complaining about what's going on in their kids' school or what's going on in their company. Sometimes people that are running the companies coming.
Now pay attention. Like I have this often, and I probably wouldn't have noticed this if I didn't have this. So I've got my lens right here. And I've got my computer screen right here where I'm watching them. And then I've got the little, sometimes when I try to talk to you, well, I've got the little camera viewfinder flipped up here on my Sony. It kind of flips up. And I notice often if I, on the very rare occasions that I actually look again at one of these videos, see, now I know I'm looking straight at you. Now I'm looking at the viewfinder, which is flipped up, and now I'm looking at the screen. And of course, we human beings are very sensitive about what we look at and when we look at them. Now pay attention in this part of the video when she looks right into the lens and when she's looking right at either Jordan or herself on the Zoom or the Skype call, because this is when she's starting to preach.
To me, school, everyone that comes to me.
See, now, of course, you know, there's up to the left, you know, you're thinking, and, you know, there's all the eye movement stuff. Just pay attention when she looks straight at the camera, when she really wants to get the message to you, because, you know, she and Peterson talk in this video too about, and when you do a conversation like this, it's in public. It's not exactly what you'd say in private, and that's exactly appropriate. And, you know, we see that in my channel too, but just pay attention here.
You know, complaining about what's going on in their kids' school or what's going on in their company. Sometimes people that are running the companies coming to me complaining about what's happening in their own company that they have control over. Like, enough. Like,
see that? Straight into the camera. Enough. Just get excited watching religions get birthed.
No more complaining quietly. No more anonymous emails. Like, the time is now to out yourself as someone that is opposed to this.
Out yourself.
That is alarmed about it. And then spend all of your energy and money and time banding together with people to build new things.
She's a preacher. That's what she's doing.
I wish there was another option, because that sounds exhausting, I realized. But I just don't think there's another option.
And this is in some ways where you get to the bright fog of secularism, because, you know, as a pastor in churches, you know, this is what we do as preachers. And It's on the line right now. The time is now. Billy Graham, the music swells. It's the time, the moment of decision is now. Come to the front. And she's saying basically, you're all living your life out there in the fog. It's time to get clear and to come here and to stand up and hey, I agree with what she's saying. I think people should. I think this moment is a moment of cowardice among many people. There are real reasons. And again, they talk about this in this video, and Jordan speaks about this very well. There's real reasons why people don't want to stand up and say what they think. So do it. Stand up and say what you think. But pay attention. What is this altar that you're calling me to? Now, again, in this fog, generally speaking, I'm pretty much in agreement with these guys. When I grew up right outside of New York City, and, we had this little newspaper in Patterson, but I would regularly get and read the New York Times. I was a news junkie as a kid. I didn't have the best grades in my high school class, but then we had this little, I don't know where it came from. There's this quiz, and it came around, and it was basically a current events quiz. And I smoked the class. I smoked my entire, it's not a big graduating class, only about 100 kids, but I smoked them all. Why? I was a news junkie. All I did was listen to the news. Other people were listening to music. I listened to news. I listened to WINS, 10:10 a.m. If you've got 20 minutes, we'll give you the world. I listened to that over and over and over and over and over again. I knew the news. I read the New York Times. These are the people I grew up with. And so there's a huge amount of commonality between me and them, absolutely. But I am also a preacher, and I know religion when I see it. And I understand an altar call when I hear it. And this is one.
3 years ago, if you had asked me, I would have suggested something different. I really believed that a lot of these institutions can be saved. And by the way, some of them, and to the extent to which there are ones that can be saved and shored up, they should be. Because it's really, 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 really hard to build new things. Really hard. It's so easy to tear things down. But
watch your eyes through these portions.
But that's the conclusion that I've come to. And I think the more people that can, let's grieve the 20th century institutions that are crumbling. Let's understand that they are something, that they might have the same name, but they're no longer what they used to be. And then let's get to work building the things that we know we need to build that are necessary for upholding the civilization that we talked about earlier. That's what I think the task is.
And now you expect music and everybody to stand up and sing a song together. What are you going to sing? Because, when I talk to conservatives about this stuff, there's a fair amount of bitterness out there. Because they would say, hey, you know what? Okay, so all this woke stuff came about in 2013. As one very sharp member of our local meetup said about Brett Weinstein, about a number of these people. You trained your own murderers. And that's, I think, something that IDW, I don't really think about Ben Shapiro and the IDW. He's just a conservative. When I think about IDW, I think about these refugees and Substack, and I include myself in there. Again, grew up reading the New York Times. Dave Rubin, Brett and Eric Weinstein. These are Jordan Peterson. These are people that traditionally were on the left, probably moderate left, who now, as the left kept moving out, they're just sort of like, whoa, wait a minute. I always considered myself a progressive and a liberal, and now suddenly I'm getting yelled at as a conservative, and that's because everybody way to the left of me is like, you over there beyond the pale. It's like, well, it's only beyond the pale because you walked so far that way. There's a lot of people in America that feel that, and that's part of the reason. At one place in this video, she talks about those who are optimistic, and that's sort of where I'm at. I think there's a lot of cowardice, and her appeal that people should stand up and speak their mind, I think that's very true. And I think that is needed to sort of bring a degree of rationality, dare I use that word, into this conversation. Yet the deep conservatives have a point. And the sort of IDW people who are, now the new conservatives should listen to that point and say, is there in that liberalism a sufficient foundation to reestablish new institutions? Or was the blue church always sort of the thinning edge of the bright fog of secularity? I think that's a really important question to come to terms with. And it's a terrifying question. In other words, there's no going back. I mean, Bari Weiss could say, right after we approved gay marriage, there's the line. And I'm not interested in undoing the legality of gay marriage in America, even though I've got some ideas about it that she might not like. But that's because the thing is, if you're going to found a religion, you have to found it on something. You can't just, otherwise it gets decadent. Otherwise you're just the latest iteration. You're the new increasingly fundamentalist. You keep, if all you want to do is reestablish what has been lost, and let's say 2013 was the end of history, you're not going to survive then either, especially without a church, a community, because religious people actually know how to maintain a community against other communities. And all of these that are pretty much just political figures without really the practices and the communities of real religion, they're not going to make it. And they talk about that in here as well. I mean, there's a brief moment where Jordan Peterson says, well, it's basically the really religious people that they might be the only ones to survive this stuff. Yeah, I think that's right.
Thank you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Jordan.
There's the doxology, right? So, yeah. Will I treat this video more? We'll see. That stuff on systemic racism I want to get into. The stuff on religion I want to get into. But what I just laid out right here, I think, is the core of this conversation. That these two share an ideology, but they don't have all of the elements beneath that religions have and strive from. And so in a culture war like this, they lose. And I think this is part of the reason many in the thinning fog of secularity head towards the sun. And they're losing some fogginess. Now, again, I got to be careful with this metaphor because I don't know how much any of us can stand direct sunlight because our deeds are evil. Prologue of the Gospel of John. I'm a Calvinist, I believe when Jesus says, though you are evil, you still know how to give good gifts to your children. Calvinists at the beginning of that say, because you are evil. It's like, yeah, we are. It's true. We need to be remade. We need to be remade from the top down. We need to be remade. And so that's why I'm a preacher of a religion that is a religion. But yeah, that's the core of this. And I guess I wanted to get that out first before I deconstruct any other piece of this. So maybe that's it for this video.